Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zeckthar.
And I'm Yuksen.
We are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and this week we will be looking into the sons of Ultramar, the Ultramarines.
That's right, Zeckthar, the Ultramarines, also lovingly known as the Book Boys or Smurfs. This month, we will be taking a deep dive into Roboute Gulliman, famous Ultramarines, the Primarchs project, and of course, our Q&A at the end of the month, when we answer your questions.
Of course, Yuksen, but to our dear listeners, if you like our stuff, please subscribe, follow, like, and comment. And if you wish to help Bob, you can click the support podcast button on any of our descriptions on Spotify.
Quite right, Zeckthar. If you like what we do, don't hesitate to plug in on Spotify. We wish to keep this free and without ads. So if you find folks truly enjoy this, you can help. If you only donate to Bob on our Spotify channel for 99 cents a month, we can continue doing our stuff without those hated ads. Now, mind you, if you wish to do more, feel free. But this is all we ask, just 99 cents. Well, Zeckthar, let's get into it, shall we?
Yes, well, this week, I figured we could start with the King Smurf himself, the one that now rules the Empire, Roboute Gulliman.
Of course. Where else could we start? But Zeckthar, haven't you already chronicled a lot of Roboute's history through your short boxes?
Indeed, Yuksen. I covered much of Roboute during the Horus Heresy and the Great Scouring. So I figured this week we could go all the way back to before the beginning, on an insignificant planet named Macragge. Now, thanks to the fact that Roboute has held such a high rank for so long, be it the Lord Regent of the Impirium, ruler of the Ultramar sector, or the mighty crusading Primarch, his early origins are fairly well documented. As with all the Primarchs, the entities of chaos boot-kicked them across the galaxy, and Roboute landed on the planet of Macragge. Now, Macragge itself is mostly bleak and rocky, and more than 3/4 of its land mass formed from mountainous upland almost entirely devoid of life. Yet the people that lived there had been part of a long-dead star empire of ages past that had inhabited the planet for many centuries since the time of the Dark Age of technology. Its industries had survived intact, and its people had retained an authoritarian but cohesive society. It had remarkably preserved a number of antiquated, short-range, warp-capable craft, which could be utilized for near-stellar transit, and its people continued to build sublight spacecraft, even during the time of the most intense warp storms. This had allowed the people of Macragge to maintain contact with several neighboring human-settled star systems, despite the storm's fury, and so retain a tenuous link to the rest of human space, and the knowledge that it was not alone in the darkness. Now that you have a little background on Macragge, let's go back to Roboute, shall we? So it was that when the Primarch's fallen capsule was discovered by a group who were on a hunt in a local forest, they knew it immediately for a device of advanced technology rather than a thing of superstition and magic. The hunters broke the capsule seal and discovered a wee baby that was surrounded by a glowing nimbus of power.
Now, I know most human mothers say that at birth, their child glows with radiance, but I think this was more of a glow-in-the-dark kind of radiance.
Regardless, the child was brought before Connor Gilliman, one of a pair of nobles who bore the title of consul, whose authority governed the most civilized and powerful region of Macragge. And Connor adopted the infant son his own, naming him Roboute. The young Primarch grew unnaturally quickly, and as he did so, his unique physical and mental powers became obvious to all. It is recorded that by the time of his 10th standard birthday, Gilliman had mastered everything the wisest tutors of Macragge could teach him. His insight into matters of history, philosophy, and science astonished his teachers, while his recall was absolute. His ability to extrapolate accurate conclusions from fragmentary information was said to be bordered on inexplicable. Now, the scribes of the Empire of Humanity would say his greatest talent lay in the art of war, which was in itself treated as a high and lauded science in Macragge's culture. Yet, I disagree with this.
Why?
Well, for all the records I can find on Gilliman, his main strength did not apply to war, but the game of empire. Now, before I hear the outcries of our dear listeners, fear not. I did not say that he did not excel in warfare. Far from it. Of all of his brothers, I can think of only two that had a better grip on tactics and combat strategy, that being Horace Lupercal and the Lion, L. Johnson. Yet what these two lacked that Gilliman truly understood was the boring part of war: supply chain management. His concept of getting the right equipment and continual flow of resources to the front line was second to none. The Lion would say that the strength of a warrior lies in his training, tactics, and strength of arm, which is true. Yet Gilliman would tell you that even the greatest warrior is severely hampered when he has no food or ammunition.
Yes, brother, we agree that Roboute Gulliman was a great imperial manager. But what happened to him on Macragge?
Right. Well, as soon as he attained a legal majority by the Senate, Roboute's foster father, Connor, immediately granted him command over an expeditionary force sent to pacify the far northern lands of Macragge.
Strange.
Pardon?
Nothing. It's just this shows how different Gilliman was from the rest of the humans on Macragge. His father wanted him to march an army into battle at the age of 10.
That's a good point. Good point. I never really thought of it that way. Well, anyways, the land he was supposed to pacify was named Impirium, and it was a barbarous land of outcasts and petty warring microstates that had long harbored brigands and mercenaries who raided the more civilized lands to the south. Roboute fought a brilliant campaign and won both the submission and the respect of the fierce Impirium warrior bands. But when he returned to his home from the northern frontier, Roboute found the capital city of Macragge, Civitas, in turmoil. During Roboute's absence, Connor Gilliman's co-counsel, a man named Gallan, had unleashed a coup d'etat against Connor. Gallan had long harbored designs on becoming the single ruler with the backing of the aristocracy. You see, the nobles had grown jealous of Connor's political power and popularity, and also increasingly afraid of his precocious foster child, Roboute. These malcontents represented Macragge's ancient regime, an aristocracy whose wealth was manifested by vast estates which were supported by the toiling of a multitude of impoverished vassals. Connor, on the other hand, backed by Macragge's industrial magnates, rivals to the old regime, had moved to challenge this balance of power, forcing the aristocracy of Macragge to provide their vassals with increased living standards and rights before the law, weakening the aristocracy's stranglehold on the polity. Connor had also passed legislation that obliged the nobility of Macragge to begin an ambitious program of improving the long-neglected infrastructure of their nation and enlarging the capital city at their own expense. These reforms made Connor Gilliman all but unassailable in the common people's eyes, but were highly unpopular among all but a few of the more far-sighted aristocrats. As Roboute Gulliman and his triumphant army approached the city of Macragge's Civitas, they saw the smoke from the multitude of fires and encountered citizens fleeing from the city in anarchy. And Roboute learned that Gallan's private army had attacked the Senate House, while Connor and his loyal bodyguard troops had been inside. The refugees each told the same story. The rebel soldiers had attacked the Senate, whilst a drunken mob, instigated by Gallan, but now out of everybody's control, roamed the city, burning, looting, and murdering. Roboute hurried to his foster father's rescue, leaving his own troops to deal with the drunken rioters without quarter. Roboute personally fought his way through the center of the city, passing the bloody work of rebel firing squads everywhere in the government district. But at the Senate House, he found himself too late. All was a bullet-ridden and blasted ruin, and even the rebels, it seemed, had fled the scene to join looting. There, in the half-collapsed shelter beneath the building, Roboute found his dying father. For 3 local days, the wounded consul had directed the defenses of the besieged Senate House. Even as surgeons fought for his life following a botched assassination attempt on the Senate floor, which had touched off the conspiracy's chaotic attack. It is apocryphally said that as he gasped out his last breath, Connor detailed the extent of Gallan's betrayal to his beloved foster son, and named those whose hands were stained with his blood. Roboute Gulliman's cold rage at his foster father's death was unstoppable. With the full backing of his army and the beleaguered citizens of Macragge's Savatas, Roboute crushed the aristocratic rebels, scattering their hireling armies and lined the streets with the hanging bodies of the rioters, thereby quickly restoring order to the capital city and the surrounding lands. Thousands of citizens flocked to the Senate House, and amidst a wave of popular acclaim, Roboute assumed the mantle of the sole and now all-powerful consul of Macragge. The new ruler broke the old aristocratic order and stripped them from their lands and titles. Galan and his fellow conspirators were seized, the ringleaders publicly executed, and the rest sentenced to hard labor rebuilding the city they had ruined, stone by stone. It was not a sentence that they would long survive. In the new order, loyal soldiers and hardworking settlers were granted rights where the oppressive aristocracy had once held sway. With superhuman energy and singularity of vision only a Primarch was capable of executing, the new consul reorganized the social order of Macragge, creating a ruthlessly enforced meritocracy where the hardworking prospered and the honorable received positions of high office, and those who shirked the law or worked against the good of the whole faced draconian but faultlessly even-handed punishment. The stagnated and uneven economy was reordered, technology disseminated rather than hoarded by the elite, and the armed forces were transformed into a powerful and well-equipped force. Macragge flourished as never before. One people and one order, united under the unchallengeable rule of Roboute Gulliman. Now, around the time the young Roboute Gulliman was waging his war in Illyria, the Emperor's fleet had reached the planet of Espandor, at the outer edge of the network of worlds with which Macragge had maintained contact. From the Espandorians, the Emperor learned of the existence of Macragge and the extraordinary son of the consul Connor Gulliman, and from what he learned, he knew that this child could be none other than one of the missing Primarchs. The Emperor's fleet quickly moved on to Macragge so that they could reclaim his son. Yet his fleet was almost immediately deflected by violent warp squalls, which had risen up to separate Macragge and a handful of nearby systems from approach, thwarted by a power even the Emperor could not readily ignore. It would be another 5 standard years before contact could be successfully attempted. In the years that intervened, Macragge had undergone a striking transformation. It was now a world of uniformity and order, prosperous and productive. Its cities had been rebuilt in glittering marble and shining steel, and the serried ranks of its armies were well armed and well equipped, and outfitting themselves now for operations beyond their own world. For even before the Emperor's arrival, Roboute Gulliman, it is said, had dwelt much on the ancient histories contained from the world's deposed aristocracy, and the fragments he found there telling of the ancient domains of mankind. And he had begun to dream of new horizons and new worlds to conquer, of a domain beyond the seas of night, or to use the ancient scholarly form found in the text, Ultramar. By his will, he made it so, and within their warp-sealed enclave, vessels from Macragge now plied regular and well-patrolled trade routes with local star systems, bringing raw materials and people to the flourishing world, while against some of its neighbors, short victorious conflicts had already been waged to pacify the strife that they found there. It is said that when the Emperor saw what his lost son had wrought, he was indeed pleased, and that he met with Roboute Gulliman. It is recorded that once Gulliman learned the truth of his origins, he immediately swore his fealty to the Emperor, who he knew was his true father, for he had already theorized correctly the purpose for which he had not been born so much as deliberately created. And the rest, as we say in the chronicling business, that's history.
But what do you think of Roboute's upbringing?
I wish to ask you kind of the same thing, but I may interject one point that I didn't mention in my chronicling.
What's that?
Family. Now, the reason why I state this is because, as opposed to a lot of the other Primarchs, as you know, Yuksen, a lot of the other ones, anyways, didn't really have much of a whole family structure. I mean, we've already talked about, Lehman Russ, who was raised by wolves. Alfarius, who knows who raised Alfarius, or Omegan. I mean, some would say the Emperor, but what a great father figure he would be. And then, I mean, the closest we've found, anyways, from the people that we've talked about was probably what, Vulcan?
Well, yeah, his actually was. There wasn't really any turmoil when it came to his family. In fact, I don't think it's even mentioned whether or not his father died, his foster father.
Right. The only thing they really discuss, anyways, is that he taught him the ways of the forge, I believe, because he was a blacksmith. But yeah, I'm just trying to think, anyways. I mean,
or whatever they called him.
Was that?
Or blacksmith, or whatever it was that they called him.
Yeah, they had a weird name for him. You're right on Nocturne. But I'm trying to think of the other ones, anyways. And okay, so let's see, Perturabo. He ended up kind of raising himself. The Nightmare, anyways, out of all of them, anyways, was probably the least structured. His being raised. Second close is probably Lionel Johnson, who was literally, anyways, just fought monsters in a forest before he was discovered. But a lot of them seem to have kind of this
comparison to Russ, who was raised by wolves.
But he was raised by wolves. The Lion didn't have that luxury. He kind of had to fend for himself. But regardless, one of the things that is interesting about Roboute is that when he grew up in a close nucleus family. He had a mother, he had a father that both really loved him. He had brothers and sisters. And I think that kind of drastically made a huge impact, actually, on Roboute.
And they were well off.
That also helped, too. Yeah. I don't know. What do you think? I think it really did shape, anyways, his character quite a bit.
Okay. I find that family probably did have a very large impact, and which shows how, because he had this structured lifestyle and how he was taught in comparison to everybody else, how they were taught. Like, for example, Liam Russ, wolves. The Khan was raised in a nomad tribe.
Right. Nomadic society.
I don't know what Rogel Dorn's background is.
That's actually, I was just thinking that, anyways. I would bet that it was actually fairly similar to Gilliman, but I don't know.
The only one that I know that specifically is mentioned as having learned from a very specific source was Vulcan, but that was after he was picked up by the Emperor, because he spent an extensive amount of time with the Emperor.
Right. But what do you think also, anyways, of Roboute's background, other than, like what I was just saying? But, I mean, what do you think of his background? How do you think it really shaped the man, so to speak?
Well, I think because of the structure and how he is taught, that's one of the things that made him become more of a supply chain person, because he had the majority of, and I don't entirely agree with your statement of him being like one of the top 3 tacticians.
Oh, who do you think was
the only reason why I say that is because maybe if you're looking at it from, overall, but if you look at it as some of these chapters, Primarchs, they exceeded so much further when it comes to tactics in one particular area.
Okay, so you mean, for instance,
it's more of it.
Oh, hang on, I have a second. So you're kind of saying, for instance, Perturabo was second to none, anyways, in siege breaking, or Rogel Dorn, anyways, was the great builder.
Yeah, or the White Scars and fast attacks.
Right. Yeah, but okay.
And Alpha Legion and just screwing everything up.
Right.
For the enemy. I mean, screwing the enemy up so much.
Right. Well, and also sometimes their own friendlies. But when I mean, anyways, by strategic and tactics, anyways, is I mean, literally, anyways, running a whole army. I mean, you're talking about Primarchs, anyways, that were very good, anyways, in particular things. They didn't, though, anyways, have that great grasp anyways of like, okay, we use these units to do this, we use these units to do this.
Well, that's where it comes in as more of a empire thing in comparison to battles.
Right, but I said before, anyways, I think the only other two, anyways,
One of
would
them
be Horus
is
and,
okay, looking at an entire campaign and going from that angle. Yeah, I definitely put him up there as one of the top tiers.
right.
If it's like one particular aspect, like for example, you need somebody that does fast attack, or you need somebody to build defenses. In those areas, there's generally somebody that fits that better. He could probably still do it, but not as well.
Okay, and my argument to that would be, anyways, he would say, okay, so I need, anyways, some fast troops that move in here. Okay, Jagatai, how you doing, man? Why don't you go ahead and set up, anyways, and figure out, anyways, what you're going to do there, and then I'll complement you, anyways, with my Ultramarines, and we'll figure out, anyways, a plan that we can run through that.
That's exactly what I was saying. You do realize that, right?
No, you're saying, anyways, is this...
I'm saying in comparison to, he has more of a broad, like, if you were to do a campaign, that
he's a
sort
better
of
leader.
in comparison to very finite, like, this battle requires this sort of thing. Okay,
That's
he
like...
wouldn't necessarily be the best person for that particular situation. It would probably be...
That's like... Yuksen, that's like saying, anyways, it's like, like on Terran 42, it's like you have a general for the United States Army, and he's like, right, what we need here, anyways, is a sniper. I'm going to have somebody else do that because I'm not as good as them at that.
Except for it's
but the sniper's not going to be able to lead armies.
It's except the same for it's at an army level instead of just one individual.
Okay. We could go 10 rounds on this. Could you agree with me at least, anyways? He was a brilliant leader and probably second to only a couple of them. Thank you.
So, your thoughts have been interesting, brother.
And to a lesser extent, so of yours.
Thank you. But this is a conversation about family, which begs the question, what did the Avenging Son think of his true brothers, the Primarchs?
We could have already started talking about this, but you got to keep in mind that Roboute thought of himself probably better than his other brothers when it came to like we just mentioned, anyways, tactics and war and stuff like that. The only ones though that he thought him at least better or equal to, the only ones that he really thought that were kind of above him was the Lions, Sanguinius, and Horus. And I mean, we could kind of go. We've already kind of gone into a lot of these on our short boxes. I mean, I kind of discussed in detail, anyway, Sanguinius and the Lion, and the Impiruim Secundus, both of those short boxes, and then, I mean, we can't really get into all of them. And we also talked about Alfarius. He didn't really like Alfarius.
Yeah. It's like, I can do this and they can stop. It's like, well, I can do this and they won't be able to do anything to stop.
But I kind of titled it down to 5 of them anyways. And this was actually kind of hard trying to find information anyways about what they kind of thought of each other. And they're ones that you probably won't hear a whole lot of other places. And that would be, I figured we could talk about a couple of them that we've already kind of discussed, Yuksen. So I figured we'd talk about Leman Russ and Vulcan. I mean, we've already kind of talked about them at length. But Korvax, Angron, and Magnus, I figured those would all be kind of interesting as well. Now, as far as I've looked up anyways, Leman Russ and okay, so this is, we are also taking this into account anyways. This is during the Great Crusade, right, Yuksen?
Right.
So this isn't anyways past that point. This isn't during the Horus Heresy, because obviously, I mean, once the Horus Heresy starts anyways, I mean, yeah, he hates Angron and Magnus because they're enemies.
Right.
But yeah, we're talking about during like the Great Crusade when the Emperor's finding all of his brothers anyways, kind of what he thinks of them. Now, if I recall right anyways, Leman Russ was actually found before Gulliman, right? I think he was the second Primarch found.
I don't
Technically.
know if he was the second.
I'm pretty sure he was, because if I recall right, the first one, okay, according to doctrine, anyways, the Imperium doctrine, the first one the Emperor found
Was that there? No.
yeah, okay, Horus, and then the second one, if I recall right, was actually Leman Russ, because when he brought him back, yeah, actually I do remember this, because when he brought him back anyways into the fold, he had one brother there, and Leman was just so happy to see it, that he had a brother, and Horus really didn't like Leman. He never did. So it was just kind of like, hey, how you doing? And the other one's just kind of like, go away. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about Leman and Roboute. Now, from what I've gathered anyways, it ranks anyways from they were like complete bros, they really loved each other, to just simply they had a deep respect for each other and what they did anyways for the Emperor. Now,
based off of their characteristics
mm-hmm.
and how they see themselves, I would find it more likely that Gilliman probably had respect for Russ, but he also had some of the same aspect as a lot of people that viewed Leman Russ as
the barbarian.
Yeah, he's kind of a barbarian here.
I'm betting anyways that their relationship was strained the longer it continued on. And we do kind of see that, by the way, after the second founding. But
you mean where he basically said no?
Yeah. Roboute Gulliman is like, I'm the leader of the empire and you're going to do as I say. And Russ said, no, I'm not. And
fine, I'll do another founding. Oh, wait, look at that. No.
It was stated at one point anyways that Russ, when he disagreed with the Emperor, he actually struck the Emperor. He was so mad. And obviously the Emperor anyways corrected that very quickly. But could you imagine anyways, somebody anyways that is that stubborn anyways, Gilliman telling him to do something? Yeah, it ain't happening. Yeah. Like I said anyways, I think anyways during the Great Crusade, the longer it went on, I think their relationship probably strained more. But I bet when they first started out anyways, Leman was probably, it's like, we should go get a beer. I mean, that sounds like a very Leman Russ thing to do, and, invite him in for a feast or something like that, which I think Gilliman would be really appreciative of. But then as it goes on, it's just, yeah.
Maybe not the brightest idea. You know what? I'll call you next time.
Yeah, exactly. I've got your information. I'll let you know. But
I never did.
I think okay. So I think anyways, we'll tie this one into they did have a respect for what each one of them was good at. But by the end of the Great Crusade, that's kind of as far as it went. They weren't like hanging out. They weren't doing any of that kind of stuff. Or the second one that we did talk about anyways, or we did a whole Vox on, was Vulcan. Now, what do you think Vulcan anyways and Roboute's relationship was like?
Okay, so here's the thing about Vulcan. The only person that they specifically say that he had when it came to either being a bad or good relationship, the only one that they really specifically mention that I can think of anyways is Ferrus Manus, right?
Yeah. Honestly, when they're talking about relationships, kind of just like they were agreeable with each other, yeah. Although it is noted anyways that Vulcan actually crafted power sword, if I recall right, for Leman Russ after they engaged in a particular campaign. So he did have a respect for Leman, I think, but it wasn't. That's about as far as it went. It's like, thank you for pulling me out of the fire. Here's a sword.
Yeah, the thing is the only case where they really talk about him having a yay or nay towards somebody.
It was
I think Ferrus Manus, and the reason why it was positive, one of the reasons behind that is because they were both craftsmen.
Right.
They spent time together, even on Mars when they worked there.
Right.
And so, yeah.
And getting back to Roboute, though, I think they got along fine, but honestly, everything that I've ever found about Vulcan, other than that kind of interesting relationship that he had with Ferris, he was kind of an introvert. I mean, he kind of throughout the whole Great Crusade, he kind of kept to himself, didn't he?
Well, I think it's more like he had this friendly way about him, but it's just like, okay, yeah, he's the friendly kid in the corner, but he also seemed to be probably the most mature out of them. So maybe they went, yeah, we're gonna play with people our level.
Yeah, I think in that aspect, though, I think that he probably got along better with Roboute, though, because from what I've gathered, anyways, especially when we kind of brought this up, anyways, with his upbringing, anyways, he seems significantly more adult than a lot of the rest of his brothers. Roboute did. So I think, anyways, that they probably, I mean, like I said, I think they got along fine. I think it's just everything that I've ever read about Vulcan, he seemed incredibly introverted. It doesn't mean that he wouldn't hang out or deal with his brothers. It just
At least when it came to the other Primarchs.
Yeah. But by the way, speaking of introverts, anyways, we are going to get we got to go into probably the most introverted out of all of them, which is Korvax.
Korvax.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about the quiet, brooding kid in the corner with the goth hair, yeah, that's Korvax.
Pale.
Yeah,
you know,
pale. Loves
looking around for the random thing to.
Yeah. Brings in the dead animal for show and tell. I found this on my back porch. It's like, okay, that's nice, Korvax. Go back, sit at your desk. We'll put this in the corner. But yeah,
and that's where Conrad Kurz would go after that.
No,
dead rats.
Okay, I do got to say anyway that if there was like a teacher for like 5th grade or something like that, and she had all these Primarchs in her class, she would lose her mind by the end of the school year. Just having to deal with these outrageous characters. But anyways, getting back to Korvax, anyways, what do you think, anyways?
Vulcan? Thank goodness there's one nice kid.
What do you think that Korvax, and Roboute? I mean, the only thing that I could find is that at one point, anyways, I will say this about Korvax. Korvax thought about warfare differently than Roboute did, which is kind of interesting because Roboute, as we know, anyways, is when we already talked about it, this great tactician, right? Well, there's at this point, anyways, where Korvax was known to have actually bested Roboute Gulliman in his notoriously testing Tristigio Simulacra. Am I pronouncing that right?
Simulacra?
Yeah. And how he did that was he used several unconventional troop types that Roboute never even really thought about. And so he ended up losing. Now, mind you, anyways, Roboute, by the time, anyways, they did this 3 times, anyways, Roboute was smart enough that he figured out, anyways, how to beat him. And then he never lost again. I mean, this does kind of go back to what we were talking about before, anyways, as about being a great tactician. But other than that, I can't really think of any other time, anyways, that they really came into contact as much. What do you think, anyways, the relationship was like?
He can be pretty well blindsided if he hasn't seen it before. So he has to see it at least once or twice before he can get down what it is that needs to be done.
Right. Sort of thing. I think honestly, anyways, if we're gonna go anyways of what the relationship was, as opposed to Vulcan, anyways, which I think, anyways, they were on decent terms with each other. With Korvax, probably just straight up ignored him most of the time.
I don't think Korvax would care.
I think that's what it boils down to, is that Korvax is just kind of like, yeah, that's my brother Roboute, and Roboute kind of was like the same thing, like, oh yeah, there's Korvax.
This is the same guy that went, you know what? Peace out, y'all. I'm going to try to kill Lorgar. And then he disappeared into the warp.
Right. That's a story for another time. Now, and honestly, I think we covered Korvax. But now we come on to the 2, anyways, that ended up turning to chaos. But So we've got Angron and Magnus. Which one would you like to start with?
Let's start with Angron. I think that he wouldn't care for Angron, personally. Somebody who's pretty much always aggressive and hates much.
I honestly think that he probably looked at Angron more as a weapon than an actual person.
Yeah.
To put it bluntly, I think, anyways,
Keep him
after
in the
dealing with
cage until we need him.
him, and then open the cage and let him do his thing, and then we'll put like, I don't know, like some fried chicken in his cage, so he'll come tooling back, and then we'll lock the cage up until next time we need him.
Sadly enough, that'd be kind of treating him the same way that he was when he was raised, right?
Yeah,
If he was
and honestly,
the Coliseum.
the story of Angron in and of itself, anyways, and we will get into him at some point, probably when we actually bring up the Horus Heresy. The story of Angron is actually a fairly sad story. It turned him into this giant beast, also known as the Red Angel, who just was a monster. And like we said before, anyways, the concept of how Roboute was raised, I think, drastically changed him. I think the same thing happened with Angron. The difference, though, is that Angron, instead of being raised in, constructive nucleus, anyways, of the family, he was beaten and destroyed pretty much. Turned into a weapon as a child, which, like I said,
slammed into his skull.
Yeah. Like I said, we will get into Angron at some point anyways, and it is actually a fairly sad story. And actually, out of all the Primarchs that turned to the heresy anyways, he probably has the most of a worthy beef against the Emperor, in my opinion. But yeah, like I think you kind of agree with me anyways that Gilliman probably just looks at him as a weapon.
Yeah.
Magnus, on the other hand, is a different story. Magnus is Magnus. It's interesting how people think of Magnus, actually. I have always just kind of looked at Magnus as kind of being more just like the dumb, smart guy, if that makes sense. I mean, he
seems like, okay, what he seems like is the mage that's been in solitude for like 50 years. So he's a brilliant mage, but when he actually interacts with people, he's extremely stupid.
Yeah.
I can cast this thing that can bring down the mountains. You aren't supposed to do that anymore. But I can cast it down. Watch.
Okay, maybe stupid's the wrong term. I'm thinking probably ignorant is probably a better term. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Ignorant of social aspects. Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. And I think Gilliman probably looked at him as like his kooky brother. He's just kind of like, he has a lot of interesting qualities, and just kind of every once in a while just kind of shakes his head and just kind of like, what are you doing? And at other times, anyways, Magnus would say something, and he'd be just like, that's really brilliant. You should say that. Not this other thing, anyways. Do that. The only time that I've really actually seen, anyways, any real concept, anyways, was during the what was that meeting that they had about psychers during the Great Crusade.
I can't remember what it is.
I can't remember what it was called either. Now, mind you, anyways, okay, before that point, anyways, Magnus had kind of got into it with Lehman Russ, right?
Well, it wasn't during the Great Crusade. It was like just prior to the Horus Heresy,
which was the Great Crusade. This took place towards the end of the Great Crusade. Let's put it that way. I mean, the Great Crusade continued on all the way up until we get to the Horus Heresy. That's what stopped the Great Crusade.
Oh, okay.
But okay. So this takes place, anyways. Though, if I recall right, this takes place after the Emperor has given the reins. Now, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure, anyways, this is after the Emperor gave the reins over to Horus.
Yes.
Yeah. And they have this big meeting, anyways, on how psychers should be used. Should they be used even? And obviously, anyways, the two Primarchs that were really against it was Leman Russ and Mortarion. And Mortarion's his own monster. But Leman Russ, anyways, actually had a good argument behind it, because if you recall right, anyways, he had fought with Magnus in a crusade earlier, anyways, and he actually watched firsthand as a lot of these Thousand Sons, anyways, slowly started to form into demons. He had a problem with that.
Or at least one of them did, and the other ones were starting to.
Right. And Magnus was trying to help this guy out, and Russ's first response was just to put a hole between his eye sockets.
Which, in my opinion, was the right thing to do. Actually, in my opinion. At the point that we were talking about, he pretty much was completely, there really wasn't any way to come back from it. So, I probably would have shot him too.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that one. But obviously, Magnus had a problem with that, though.
Well, yeah.
And if I recall right, it literally took both armies, anyways, to hold their Primarchs back.
Right.
Because they were about to go toe-to-toe, which they do later on, but that's what we're talking about here. So during this whole debate, anyways, on Psychers, the only thing I could really find was Roboute Gulliman actually was a proponent, anyways, for Psyker use. He saw the ability of using them.
But if I remember right, didn't he and the Khan kind of help create the Librarius?
Who, Magnus or
no?
Roboute?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember that. Did they? Was it both of them?
I want to say yes, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
So that would make sense, anyways, why he was a proponent of it then.
Because I think the viewpoint was at that point for the Khan. Well, as we know, the Khan actually liked Magnus, so he wasn't opposed to Psychers, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I think both of them were wise enough that they could see, okay, having Psychers is a good thing, but not at an extreme level. Like, for example, having an entire chapter being Psychers.
Or Legion. At that point, it was a Legion, which is even worse.
Legions.
Legions of Psychers. Oh, no. And that's also why you could see, anyways, why Leman Russ had a problem with that. But, okay, so real quick before we carry on, because we do have to kind of get past this, because we got a lot of other things we got to cover. You did mention, anyways, Gilliman did kind of work with the Khan, anyways, on this library, right? Or what'd you call it?
The librarian or librarius.
Yeah.
Librarian.
So just real quick, anyways, what do you think, anyways, the Khan and the Avenging Son thought of each other? Because I think you actually mentioned at one point, anyways, the Khan kind of, other than being an outcast, he really was kind of an adult amongst children, right?
Yeah, he was, I think, also very mature in comparison to a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that the upbringing would be different enough. And one of the things about him was he was very reserved. And that point is at a level where they didn't know which way he would go. It sort of shows that probably Gilliman went, okay, I understand this person's chapter's benefits at least. So, and though he probably didn't interact much with them either, because another thing about the White Scars is they were sent off so often and out into oblivion, basically.
Right. Well, I just kind of wanted
I would think you would just see him as just, okay, this guy's another person. He's mature, I guess. That's pretty much all you'd have on a viewpoint of him.
I think, though, that he would have more, as opposed to, like, for instance, we kind of mentioned that Korvax, he just kind of was like, well, he's just another brother. I think with the Khan, on the other hand, I think he would be intrigued about why he's so distant, which would add kind of the curiosity of him. Now, remember, anyways, Roboute, out of all of his brothers, is probably the most idealistic. So it kind of makes it kind of interesting, anyways, of what his relationship was with the Khan.
But, of course, they do have a little bit of a conflict in one particular area. One of them is Gilliman was somebody who's just like, we need to set up an empire and basically sit on it.
Right.
one of the cons, very, very specific things that, and one of the reasons why he said, I will not permanently take control of the world they basically conquered, is because in his viewpoint, that causes basically weakness over time because you aren't doing anything to stay ahead or stay up to date. So you're starting to just basically slowly degrade things, was his viewpoint. Well, so there is a little bit of conflict on ideals there.
Right. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today. But join us next time for Roboute Gulliman's greatest accomplishments, mainly the Codex Astartes and the Primarchs project. If you enjoyed our Vox, please follow, subscribe, like, and comment. And as always,
until next time, this is Zeckthar, signing off.